The slasher is one of the most popular subgenres of horror film. Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream are some of the most well-known horror films out there. But what even makes a slasher movie? And where did they come from? These are two very good questions. First off, not everybody can always agree on what exactly makes a slasher film, but it seems that the bare bones criteria is that the film has to follow a group of people, typically teenagers, being picked off one by a seemingly unstoppable killer.
How? I killed him.
You can't kill the boogeyman.
There's usually a relatively high body count, at least one person to make it to the end, and the killer is usually a human being, although that can vary from film to film. This is why Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho is actually considered a proto-slasher film, as it helped create what would eventually become the slasher, but it doesn't quite have what it needs to be one itself. This is subjective in a way, as if you consider it to be a slasher film, then it definitely can be one. However, if we're going by what many film critics agree to be the main criteria of slasher films, like what we just discussed, then Psycho does not count. The murders committed by Norman Bates aren't the main point of the film, but rather his character and the people that he interacts with.
Oh, and they'll say, why, she wouldn't even harm a fly.
If you want to talk about the first real films of the slasher genre, then you're going to have to jump ahead a decade for 1974's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Black Christmas. And then, of course, John Carpenter's 1978 masterpiece, Halloween, with the very iconic Michael Myers. These three horror films of the mid to late 70s are practically universally agreed to be the true creation of the slasher subgenre. The rest would come soon after with an explosion in the 80s with a huge focus on sex, blood, and screams. Friday the 13th was created as a cheap knockoff of Halloween in 1980, but would eventually become as iconic of a series as Halloween with Jason Voorhees. Nightmare on Elm Street would be released in '84, another incredibly popular series with the sadistic killer Freddy Krueger. The slasher explosion of the 80s was huge and not only created the very popular series I had just mentioned, but also many other lesser-known films and series like My Bloody Valentine, Sleepaway Camp, and Child's Play. Then, as the slasher started to lose popularity in the 90s, director of Nightmare on Elm Street, Wes Craven, reinvented the slasher with Scream.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
The film was self-aware and funny, using the previously established tropes of the slasher and actually applying them to the plot.
His body will come popping up in the last reel somewhere. Eyes gouged out, fingers cut off, teeth knocked out. See, the police are always off track with this shit. If they'd watch Prom Night, they'd save time. There's a formula to it. A very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect.
A huge point of the slasher films in the 80s was punishing young teens for committing certain acts, such as premarital sex, drugs, drinking, and typically those who would live to the end are those who did not partake in such activities. And a huge point is made of that in Scream.
Rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex. No. Big no-no! Big no!
I'm a dead man.
Sex equals death, okay? Number 2, you can never drink or do drugs. No, the sin factor. It's a sin. It's an extension of number 1. And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back.
I'm getting another beer. You want one?
Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back.
Scream was a huge success and paved the way for more films to come, such as I Know What You Did Last Summer. However, it seems that as the years continued into the 2000s, the slasher once again began to decline in popularity, and psychological horrors such as Saw and The Babadook began taking its place in filling seats. That being said, though, they at the same time appear to be making a comeback in the recent years, most notably with the Halloween reboot trilogy and the newer Scream titles. I, for one, am very excited to see what creators do in the future with these tropes and ideas, and maybe something new can be done with it. At the same time, maybe not, considering all these new slasher movies are just sequels and reboots for the most part. Only time will really tell.